Greetings, friends. Wanda and Grisky here. And today, this is the weekly Russian-Ukrainian War update for the week of November 20th through November 26th of 2023. So for this week, we're going to be focusing, as always, on the Avdiivka area, part of the Donetsk front. So this week, we're going to focus on the southern part of the Avdiivka front because this is where all the action has been taking place. So for this week, the main focus has been over this industrial zone right here and its adjacent dachas here. This is called, I believe, the Prompko industrial zone, I believe. This is part of, as you can see with this blue line, part of the pre-war Ukrainian defense line. And this is actually probably one of the most fortified areas of the entire Ukrainian front line, because the front line ran along Donetsk, and this was basically where the Ukrainians made their biggest defense points. And so this is not just like, oh, they took, a part of the just a regular industrial zone. This is like, if you look closely at it, you could see, all the trench networks that are like, going through it and everything, because this is a heavily fortified area that the Ukrainians built up to withstand a Russian assault into Avdiivka, because that's what they were expecting. So clashes were taking place in this industrial zone this entire week, and finally, by the end of the week, the Russians have fully controlled themselves on this, have fully captured the industrial zone, and the Ukrainians have fell back to the residential areas. The Russians have also been starting to clear this adjacent dacha area. It is not completely taken yet, but most of this area has been, this area is getting cleared as we speak. But this is going to fall, and this is probably also going to fall. But right now the Russians are clearing this area as we speak. It's not completely taken yet, but it's probably going to be taken in the next day or so. What I want to mention is that this is one of the main Ukrainian defense points here. And I want to mention, so first, on the westernmost edge is the old anti-aircraft military defense base. The Ukrainians have built this area up as their own defense network. You could see the trenches here as well because this is also part of the pre-2014 defense line, so this is part of it. The next part is what they call the Tsar's Hut. It's like a hotel. It is on, you could see it right here. This is another part. This is a strong point for the another strong point for the Ukrainians that form this defense line. The next part was the industrial zone that I mentioned and its dachas, which were taken by the Russians. And the last point is this filtration system. So this area forms kind of one of the main defense lines of Avdiivka. The other two is this high-rise building area, and the other is this Avdiivka coke plant. Everything else is just residential areas, which will be easy to take. But these are the main fortifications. There's also like some trenches here, but they're not, they're just trenches. They're not actually fortified areas that'll be hard to take by direct assault. So the capture of this industrial area is very important, because not only does it form, what the Russians will probably be doing after they clear these dachas is probably to advance through this area and enter, this in the southern part of the residential area, because once they try to start fighting in this industrial zone, this residential area, they'll start getting behind. They could overrun, get right behind the Ukrainians at the Tsar's hut, and that means that, instead of having to take it by direct assault, which is kind of hard because it's in the forest and it's in a height area, when the Russians are back here, the Ukrainians will be forced to withdraw and go back to the high-rise buildings here. Another thing is that, let's say that once the Russians break through here and enter the southern residential areas, which they could do now that they captured the industrial area, probably if you see this church here and the cemetery somewhere, they'll probably try to occupy themselves in this southern area. This will also get to the back of this filtration system, so Ukrainian defenses on this this forest with this filtration system, they'll be like, oh, they're getting to the back of us, we'll have to withdraw and try to get back to like maybe the rail station, back here. And so you could see this kind of break in the Ukrainian defense line complicates it very, because the Ukrainians were hoping to keep the Russians here, and as the Russians advanced, try to and then hopefully halt the Russians on the flanks. And but if the Russians break through the the defense lines in the south, then that would they all for naught. So the Russians are pushing there. So that's what's happening there. And in the north, the Russians are, if we look at Rybar's map, you could see that from the pumping station and the ash heap, they are now getting closer to the Avdiivka coke plant, which is, again, one of the main Ukrainian defense points in this area. Some sources are saying they entered their first buildings, probably somewhere here, or somewhere probably here or something. But we don't have 100% confirmation. But we do have confirmation of the Russians being in this area, because we saw a Ukrainian troop trying to attack Russian troops here, or like a Bradley, I believe, was attacking Russian troops there. As we can see with Rybar down on this map, but Rybar was saying basically that the Russians have been trying to take this area right here, right along the rail line. And so basically that's what the Russians have been doing, is that, they're not assaulting the coke plant directly just yet. I think what their focus, and which I think what we'll see probably in the next few weeks, is that they're going to continue advancing south through these northern dachas of Avdiivka, advance, and then once they reach, the end of it, once they enter the residential area outside the dachas, they'll be able to then, assault the coke plant. And, they could have their positions along the rail line, which will give them good defense points, and then they could start assaulting probably the southern part of the coke plant, which is not as industrialized. It's still just, and so they could then assault the coke plant from the south here, from the north here, and then obviously from the east. Once they take the southern area, once they take these northern dachas and assault this place, there's only going to be one road leading into the coke plant. Well, two, but this could be the main road, and so this could continuously be under Russian bombardment. And also, Russian advances from the north here will probably coincide with a Russian push from the south here, and I could probably expect if they're fast, the Russians could probably clear up this entire open field area, and the Ukrainians will be forced to push back to the residential area. And then it'll be kind of like, if you follow my mouse, kind of like around this area, something like that. And that will be probably, and the Ukrainians will then only be a hold of the Avdiivka city itself, while the Russians have basically taken most of the outer places. And then that's probably what we should expect. So far the Russians have been advancing more down this rail line, clearing out this area more to the south of the ash heap, and covering the eastern side of the coke plant, and they are also breaking through here, taking the industrial zone and clearing up the adjacent dachas. Along with that, this is part of the Avdiivka operation is part of the broader Donetsk front, part of the broader push for the Russians to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk. We see this in Marinka. There was some news that the Russians advanced a bit more. They took this street right here, apparently. The westernmost edge of Marinka is like it's just complete. Like if you see videos of the bombings of Marinka, there's nothing there left. There's nothing in the village left, and so the Ukrainians are basically just preventing the Russians. It's very hard for the Russians to establish themselves, though. I think it's not really any tactical significance if they capture the rest of Marinka, really. But it's kind of more for symbolic purposes, because then they could actually announce, hey, we liberated a whole village of. So it's more like symbolically. If the Russians are here compared to here, it doesn't really help. It doesn't really change the facts on the ground a bit, but it does help symbolically for the Russians. The Russians have been pushing here and trying to get closer to this waterfront here. So they've been pushing Marinka, but the liberation of this village hasn't been happened yet. But it's still they're still pushing there, because they're trying to push the Ukrainians away from the southern part of Donetsk, just as Avdiivka is to push them from the north of Donetsk. There's also been pushes to Novomikhailivka. They've been just pushing, trying to take, more, they took this area right here, this little place right here. They also, advanced more, took more tree lines. They're basically right in front of Nova Mikhailovka. The biggest problem, though, is that the picture is kind of misleading because, this entire area is mined to hell along the north. So it's not just like, oh, there's like just an open field. Why can't they just assault it? Well, it's because it's mined to hell. So they're probably going to assault this village, and then the next point is to try to take this village of Konstantinovka here. And the main purpose of this front is not only to help clear out kind of part of the it's part of a Donetsk operation, but it's also part of the South Donetsk direction of Ugledar, because if they push here, this would complicate the Ukrainian defenses here so much that they'll probably have to be pushed back to Karakova and this area right here, because this, there's certain defense points here that would make these areas untenable to hold, and this would complicate Ukrainian defenses in Velika Novosolovka. So this area is very important. The Ukrainians have to hold here in Ugledar and Nova Mikhailovka. But if the Russians manage to break through in Marinka, break through Nova Mikhailovka, and start marching up, they could complicate Ukrainian defenses with Ugledar, which has been a thorn in Russian side, and the Russians will be able to take it if they are able to sever this this road and start advancing northwards. So there's that, and so this is part of a push to get the Ukrainians away from Donetsk and push them to a new kind of front line, probably for the South Donetsk area around the Karakova line, and then in the Donetsk direction, probably, I don't know what to call it, but probably in this area where there's a river and multiple little villages that could be used as defense points, in these areas right here. So this is a natural defense area that the Ukrainians will probably use as their next defense line, and the Russians will try to take these areas, because then the Ukrainians will be here, their artillery will be here, and they'll be able to shell, the front, this area. They will still be able to shell Avdiivka, Peremyska, Marinka, but they won't be able to shell Donetsk city itself, which is the more important part. So there's that. Let's talk here in Zaporozhye. There hasn't been any advances, but one thing to notice is that the Ukrainians are still advancing. They're still trying to do attacks here. They're trying to attack. The purpose of this is not for any breakthrough. The purpose is to take Kopany and Verbova to improve their salient in this position. So it's not just where the Russians have them on three sides and they could just keep shelling them. The Ukrainians, sometimes they take a tree line. For example, they took like this tree line and this tree line a few weeks ago. About maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, they took this tree line and are trying to enter Nova Prokofivka, but that is still, and then they tried to advance to the north of Verbova. I think they tried to take this tree line but haven't taken it yet. Again, you can see it's like they take a tree line maybe every 2 or 3 weeks or so, and it's a slow, methodical progress, and it's push. Sometimes the Russians take it back, sometimes they hold it, sometimes the Ukrainians hold it, but it's something worth mentioning. But the progress is so slow that it's, it's just like I can't really comment on it. It's like, oh, taking this will complicate the whole defense network or something. It's just trying to improve their positions in the salient. Kind of the same thing with the Russians in the Kupiansk and this area, the Oskol front, the Luhansk front. They've been advancing in this area for for weeks now, for like 3 months now. And they've only been, it's again the same thing with the Ukrainians in the Zaporozhye front. They take maybe a tree line or a trench line, try to, get closer to Ivanivka, to try to take closer, advance closer to this forest near Sinkovka. Maybe they take it, maybe they get pushed back, and then they maybe are able to hold something. But again, progress is measured in taking a tree line or a trench line every 2 or 3 weeks or something. So the progress here is something that's so slow that even when I just take things at a weekly basis, it's nothing really worth discussing. But but I just wanted to mention that the Ukrainians the Russians are pushing in the Kupiansk region, but progress is slow. Same thing with the Ukrainians in Zaporozhye. Let's talk about Kherson again. The main focus is in Krinky. The main focus actually is that the Ukrainians are trying to push into this forest at the south of Krinky. The purpose is that once they establish themselves in the forest, it's a lot harder for the Russians to push them out, because when they're just stuck in this residential area, they're able to get bombed to hell, and it's, eventually all the buildings will be demolished, so they'll need a position to hold. But they managed to capture in this tree line here, this place in the forest, but a lot of sources are saying the Russians pushed them back, and the Ukrainians are back in Krinky. So it's back and forth. The main focus of the Ukrainians are trying to basically give themselves a better position to hold Krinky. Now, there's been some sources coming out saying the purpose of this was a PR move, because I thought there was like some wider strategic purpose for that, and there might still be. Like, the Ukrainians might still try to do an advance onto the Kinburn Spit, try to advance maybe, in near Pimoma and Pishinkantka here, near the Dacha, try to make some sort of breakthrough and take the land bridge. I thought it could even be more banal, like they're trying to drag Russian reserves away from Zaporozhye to Kherson. But a lot of people are saying this is actually just really a PR thing, because if you're seeing what the Western and Ukrainian press are saying, they're like, hey, the Russians are advancing in Avdiivka and all that, but hey, the Ukrainians are broken through in the Dnieper in Kherson, and they're advancing 20, 30 kilometers, which is nonsense. But again, it's for PR purposes. It's like, hey, okay, the Russians are advancing, we're also advancing, so, tic-tac-toe, nothing really matters. Well, it's like, they don't want to, again, the purpose of the Ukrainians is to not make Western opinion think that giving them supplies is a waste of time. Because right now, if they weren't doing this advancing Krinky, or this fighting in Krinky and sacrificing their Marines, then all the press would be like, the Russians are advancing, the Russians are advancing. They're like, no, we're also advancing in Kherson, so that it could be just a PR thing. And lastly, we're going to talk about the Bakhmut front, Seversk front. The main purpose here is that the Russians have been improve their positions a bit along this. They're trying to fully establish themselves and fully secure this area of the rail line, and to improve their positions near Andriivka. We mentioned last time that they managed to somehow capture a part of Andriivka, but this place is most likely in the gray zone, but because it's completely destroyed. But the Russians are trying to improve their positions here, and they advanced a bit. They also there's been some footage of Russians actually in the middle of Klishevka, but we need more confirmation on that. The Russians are right now trying to battle along this tree line here. They're trying to take these dominant heights, this area right here. You could see that you could see the trench line that they developed here, because this is this is the dominant height here that overlooks Klishevka in this area. So the Russians are trying to take this area right here, and right now they're advancing along this tree line to get closer to it. And so, the southern Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians were advancing before, is over. Now the Russians are advancing. The purpose is to try to recapture these two villages, secure themselves along the canal, and just level the front a little bit. Kind of the same thing here. So they could maybe want to advance more, but I think right now the purpose of the Russians is to just negate all Ukrainian progress in Bakhmut and return to the status quo of having a more secure front line here. So there's that, and then one last thing is that Ukrainian positions in Bilogorovka, which is a pain in the Russian side here. There's been some Russian shelling that confirm, like in this forest line right here, that confirm that the Ukrainians are in a much better position in Bilogorovka than previously expected, which explains why the Russians have not been able to actually take this village. You could see the satellite footage of Bilogorovka. If you look here, you could see that everything here is reduced to rubble. You could see all the all the shelling, and everything is just reduced to ruin here. There's literally nothing left here. So, again, maps could be deceiving. Let's look at the industrial zone, for example. Here's the industrial zone. It's completely destroyed as well. So, yeah, the rush, this front has been basically kind of static for the last few months, but just wanted to clarify that this is why the Russians have been able to take this village and flatten the front line here, because of Ukrainian positions are actually better here than expected, and the Russians aren't really pushing here. So that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. This war is characterized by advancing a few hundred meters, and it's positional. Its purpose is to improve the tactical positioning of your armies, and it's basically an attrition warfare. So if you I hope like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more videos similar to this one. Comment your thoughts, and share this video around. So aim high and wander on.